Okay, so hello and welcome to the Wellbeing Compass information event. Now, before we start, I want to clarify who is this for? So who is this event for, to make sure that you are the right people in the right room? And also, what is our Wellbeing Compass used for? So it's all the same audiences that are being used for this. So if you are HR leader, if you are a lead for health and well-being in your organization, if you are director or other person within the business who is responsible for the staff welfare and well-being, then this event is for you. And we do have tools for organizational well-being and strategic mental health support that you can benefit from. Now, this is also for any coaches, therapists, consultants, any mental health advocates, specialists in health and well-being and personal development. So from the chat, I already see that there's quite a few of you here on this call. So it's really, really good to hear that. And we will be looking at some practical tools, how you can maximize the impact of your services, how you can measure the effectiveness of your work, and how you can really drive the health and well-being in a proactive, preventative, strategic way. And this is also for any individuals who are looking for mental health and well-being support for themselves. So our psychometric assessment, it has been specifically designed to show you where exactly you are on your journey and where do you need to go and how exactly to get there, with all the practical tools and supports on your way. So what is the Wellbeing Compass? Now, my experience from working as a therapist, working with people who are having lifelong mental health issues, who've been recycled through the system and nothing seems to help. And at the same time, also working with organizations and all these high performers, top leaders and executives, sports athletes who are always pushing their boundaries and excelling. I spend a lot of time researching, well, what makes the difference, why certain people respond to challenges and difficulties in such a different way, right? So you can put one individual within the environment and they'll go, yay, I'll succeed and I'll go better and grow with it. Another person really struggles with the same context. So my research was really looking at how can we look at well-being and mental health as something that encompasses all these different complex aspects that shape who are you as an individual, that shape your well-being, shape your resilience, shape the way you respond to environment, shape the level of success that you're able to create in your life and business. And it's not that easy. I've spent more than 15 years researching different aspects of this, and I still feel like I'm only scratching the surface. And when we look at mental health, it's very often being simplified and reduced to your mindset. It's very often being reduced to some sort of, chemical neurobalance, as if it's something wrong with you from chemical or medical point of view. But in reality, there are so many different aspects in that. And our ability to be our best where it matters the most doesn't just depend on us. It also depends on our environment. And therefore, my approach on this is very, very holistic and very inclusive. And we are therefore looking at mental health, at all these different factors that contribute to shaping not only your mental health and well-being, but really your success and your ability to take control of your future and of your outcomes in your personal life and in your business. So the Wellbeing Compass is a psychometric assessment that pulled all of that research that I've been doing for over a decade together in one practical tool that would help you to assess, so where are you on all those different aspects, and what exactly can be done to improve any of those small fields that can influence your overall health and well-being. And as you know, with mental health especially, there are so many things that are not considered in mainstream treatment. You're considering things like financial well-being, which is one of the main causes of male suicide, for example. If you are in a financial situation from which you feel you have no way out, it's easier to become in a place where you don't know how to live anymore. You're looking at things like gut health, that is also not considered when we are looking at mainstream mental health treatment. We're looking at things like hormonal health, especially for women, and what impact that has on your overall health and well-being and brain health. So there's all these aspects there, and it's always in looking at the dynamic between the individual and its environment, and all of these different factors that shape us in who we are. Now, what I didn't really want to do with this assessment is make it another tool to create more labels as they are used currently in mental health. Therefore, none of these assessment principles are based on symptoms. It's all based on what it takes for you to build specific abilities, skills, and specific environment to facilitate your health and well-being, rather than just looking at the external outcome result and giving you a label for that. So it's all proactive, it's all very preventative, it's all looking at empowering each individual with, first of all, self-awareness to know where are you, and then knowing what exactly shapes the way you feel and the way you behave, what are those different influences. And then once you know that, then there are practical tools that can very specifically be tailored and addressed to fit in your results of the assessment. So we are looking, as I mentioned already, at those 12 categories in total on the individual level, and they fitting in within those 4 big fields of physical, emotional, social, and cognitive well-being. So we will be looking into detail into each of them, and we'll be looking at all of those categories. And then what we're going to be doing next is we will look also how can organizations and any environments in which we are operating can be tailored to then create this optimum environment for our health and well-being and for performance. So how can all of those aspects be maintained and encouraged and facilitated in a proactive and preventative way? But before we do that, I just want to give you a little bit more background of why we have really created this, and to highlight some of the biggest concerns and issues and some of these maybe bad practices that I've observed throughout the years in my working field. And one of the biggest things here is that now everyone is talking about mental health, right? It's a hot topic. Everyone is talking about the need to look after well-being, about looking after yourself, looking after your staff. And there's plenty of influencers and advocates, and everyone's waving the flag from the stage saying, let's talk about mental health. And it's all great, but only if it's followed by practical tools that people know what to do about this. Because if we're only encouraging people to talk, if we only asking people to open up, it often creates an increase in the situation in terms of triggers, in terms of highlighting specific awareness about people's situation and highlighting some of their issues. And therefore, if we are not backing that up with some very, very practical strategic tools, so, okay, now I know this, thanks for letting me know. I've discovered and I've learned something about myself and other people. What do I do about this? If we don't have that practical side of it, it can cause more damage. So for me, from my experience working with some of those case scenarios where people are in a very critical situations, I could really see how some of those situations have been escalated through the way how their communication or lack of support was handled. And this is all preventative. This is all can be addressed early. So instead of me supporting people one-to-one, and I know that the world cannot be changed that way. And I really wanted to make something at scale and introduce some of those practical tools. So here is a very big difference that I would like to highlight on this topic between wellness and well-being. So especially within the organizations, now everyone is talking about well-being and employee well-being, and yet what they are really doing is only wellness initiatives. So what is the difference? So wellness could be some of those practices that help us to maintain our state of well-being, and it's all about the state of maintenance. So it could be your gym membership, could be your yoga class, could be your how much water do you drink a day, cycle to work schemes, and so on. So wellness is really those self-care practices. So when we say wellness, I want you to think about self-care. What am I doing to take care of myself? What are my self-care practices? But when we talk about well-being, now I want you to think about happiness, because you might be going to the gym and to the yoga and doing all sorts of things, but you are suicidal, depressed, anxious, and so on, and so on, and so on. So those are very big differences. And if we really want to work on well-being, it will not be addressed through superficial wellness practices. We really need to make sure that we are looking deeper and looking at those issues. Well, why people are stressed, depressed, anxious in the first place, and knowing that some of those benefits, wellness benefits, are nice to have, they will not address the issues. So I would really like us to think, what are we doing to help others from strategic point of view? And that was really the biggest driver for building what we are building here. Now, the second thing is here, importance of individual empowerment. When someone is given label for depression, for anxiety, for OCD, PTSD, whatever that might be, they are not given tools to do something about it themselves. So very often from that point, they're dependent on external support. So either talking therapies, counseling, and so on, or medication. And people don't really know why they really feel the way they feel, what got them to this place, and what can they do about it. So unless we empower every individual to take ownership of their own health and well-being, we cannot really manage this change. We cannot really change this big scale of mental health problem that we are having in the world right now. So it's about each individual and empowering each person to be the best and knowing what they can do. As you know, you can, at the end of the day, you can only change yourself. You cannot change someone or something else in that context. The other problem is, of course, the limited access to mental health care, or ineffective care when we do have that access. So even before the pandemic, waiting lists were around 7 months on average, sometimes to see a mental health professional after the first referral point. To see a secondary mental health services and referral can take up to 2 years. And the access to mental health care is still very much postcode lottery. And it depends where you live and where you are and what support resources are available, that based on where you are, you will receive specific support. And there are some people who will never have an opportunity to either have the right support or have it in time that can make a difference and save lives. Now, the other aspect there, when we're looking at individual, is something that I've already mentioned before. So there is that lack of clarity. So, how well am I doing? Happiness and well-being, those are very, very subjective things, right? Can we even measure them? And sometimes there is no way to compare, well, how well am I doing to someone else? How close am I to the burnout? What are my risks for developing mental health issues in a future, right? So we don't have a way to measure it in a proactive way. Everything there is only when we've gone down the line, when we are completely burned out, laying flat on the floor with all of the labels attached to us, then we know where we are, right? Until then, there is no way for us to manage our progress, so we know where do we even start and what can we do? What are those specific tools that we are looking for? And the other aspect there is for different services that we are using or the services that we are providing for others. How do we know it works? It's very easy to have some of those subjective measures and we know how we feel really deep down. We know if something is helping us, if something is working or not. But when we are asked, especially from my work working with organizations, working in leadership development and organizational development, as you know, if you want to work with companies, they do need to have those demonstrable results. They need to have a way to demonstrate their ROI on those health and well-being initiatives. And unless we know how to demonstrate that, we cannot get the buy-in of the decision makers to even invest in some of those health and well-being initiatives. So it's really, really key aspect here is knowing how to judge some of services that are out there. How do we measure our own services that we're providing and effectiveness of that? How do we know it works? How can we prove it? And in line with that, there is nowadays overwhelm of those different providers. There seems to be an app for everything, and everyone is doing all sorts of mindfulness apps. I don't know how many of those are out there, and so many providers. Everyone is doing something about well-being and mental health, and yet those are often snippets of a specialized field that are great. And therefore, how do you know which of those do you need? How do you choose the one that will specifically address the problem that your client or your organization is having? So it's really about choice as well, and knowing how we can screen the effectiveness and the quality of the services that we have around. So who is the team behind this? So I've been working in the leadership development and organizational development fields for 17 years now, I think. And at the same time, while working in that business development field, I also worked as a therapist and coach, supporting suicidal people, supporting those who are struggling with mental health issues. So my work that I'm doing here is really about bridging the gap between the two and looking at that context between the individual and environment, and how can we bring the latest technology, the latest developments in that. My background behind that is in neuroscience and interpersonal neurobiology. So it's really looking how our brain and nervous system is shaped throughout that process, and how all these different influences that includes our mindset and thinking and behaviors, but also the external support, other people, how all of that shape us into who we are. I'm also a member of Startup Leadership Program. I've been selected as well for Zinc VC Accelerator. So I am an active player in the startup world and exploring the startup development as well. So it's really, really interesting for me, because I know that development to that level, when you're looking at VCs, investments, stages of the startup growth, There are so much resources and so much funding and so much support out there, and yet is often not accessible and not available to mental health and to people who need it the most. So I really want to bring the best out of all these three fields and put it into one tool of resources. My co-founders with me are Graham and Evaldas. So Graham is our COO, responsible for all our operations as well as product management. Evaldas is a head of software development and IT. So he's the all of the tech person who builds stuff and makes sure that everything works at the back end. Marco, he is our design and marketing lead. So all of these beautiful designs of the Wellbeing Compass, that is Marco to thank for. Bianca is helping us with our client engagement and success. So some of you might be having a chat sometime with her in the future if you want to know more. Samar, she's responsible for user insights and research, and she's also a specialist in addictions as well. So those are just our main core team members, but we also have a huge wider aspect of other part-time people who are supporting us. So researchers, clinical psychologists, experts at in different fields on mental health. So you can read a little bit more about us on our website. Now, we do actually have few different assessments. So I know somebody asked me, what is the difference between some of those different assessments that we have highlighted on our website? So I just want to highlight the differences here. So Wellbeing Compass is that main psychometric assessment with those 12 different fields in 4 categories that really assesses individual capacity and resourcefulness to build and maintain your mental health and well-being. That is quite a long and comprehensive assessment. It can take around 40 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes to complete. And it's really quite in-depth assessment. So it has around 5 questions for each of the 12 categories. So you can more or less get sense of how many questions are there to answer. Now, we also have the Wellbeing Compass, the daily check-in. So once you complete a full assessment, you also have a way to just self-sense check on those 12 categories. So where am I? So you're able to it's a very simple sliding scale in those 12 categories with 12 questions that says, how well am I doing in this field? How am I doing here today? So it just allows you to keep progress over a period of time and see any trends over longer periods. And then finally, we have organizational well-being survey, which really looks at all those environmental factors and how can businesses and their environments be used to build them and maintain that individual capacity that can then in turn be measured with some of those individual assessments. So organizational well-being survey and the daily check-in is free. The Wellbeing Compass psychometric, as it's really more than a decade of my work, there is a fee attached to that, but I will be able to tell you a little bit more about that later. So what we can do now is look into more detail into these different aspects of what exactly shapes those well-being and mental health impacts, right? What are those influences that shape this? And we'll dig deeper into each of those aspects to see what is it made out of. So let's start with emotional well-being. So emotional well-being, here we are looking at your self-regulation, resilience, and mind-body balance. So when we look about self-regulation, this is really all about you being able to control your emotions, impulses, and the very, very big part of that is building your neural brain circuits that help you to to have that control and regulation, but it's also about the wider nervous system. When we're looking about sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, when we're looking at the vagus nerve and all of that, that helps us to manage stress and the way we cope with stresses and challenges. So we're really looking at our ability from neurobiological point of view to regulate ourselves internally, to regulate our emotions, to regulate our stress. Then we're looking at our resilience. So this part is, how do we respond to external pressures and external challenges? So our ability to bounce back from some of the difficulties, but also the way we are able to learn positive lessons out of negative experiences. Because our life, the success and well-being doesn't really depend on what happened to us, but what lessons we learn out of what happens to us. So our ability to learn some of those positive, meaningful messages out of negative experiences in our life, that can really be a great purpose of our lives and build that resilience and emotional well-being. And then we're looking at the more physical aspects of it and mind-body balance. I think in this modern world, we just kind of live from the neck up in our heads. We're overthinking. We are considering ourselves these rational, intelligent human beings. And yet we forget that we have a body that has its own intelligence, that has its own processes, and we've forgotten how to use that. I know somebody here is Ayurveda specialist, so definitely they will be familiar with what I'm talking about. And when we're looking at things like yoga and Ayurveda, there's a lot of wisdom there, and yet it's not necessarily being used correctly. It's not necessarily being applied to in a way that can really drive that health and well-being. So it's looking at getting to know our bodies, knowing how to read our intuitive signals that it's sending to us, and having that neurobiological balance physically. So that's emotional regulation. Great. So the next quadrant of our well-being compass. So here we're looking at cognitive well-being. Now, I also want to highlight that I was very conscious of not calling this mental well-being, as it is very, very often used nowadays. There is a difference between cognitive and mental processes, really. And when you look at what mental processes involve from the brain point of view, there is a lot there that is unknown. When you look at the whole field of consciousness, right? We still don't know what that is. We still don't know a lot of processes that influence our well-being from that point of view. But when we look at cognitive, now we have a lot of information, a lot of research, and a lot of ways that we understand how we learn, we understand how we remember things, we understand how we learn from experiences and from information, how we make decisions, how we build purpose and meaning in life, how we plan forward, how we remember things in the past. So these are very, very specific, very clearly defined and measurable ways of how our brain works, specifically our neocortex, so our modern human rational part of the brain that's a seat of our rationality and decision making. So the reason we're choosing cognitive here, because we want to work with what we know, we want to work with data that we already have, and we know that the neocortex has a lot of different ways to regulate some of these subconscious processes. So therefore here we are looking at all of these different aspects there that we can use, and we can strengthen our brain and the capacity, cognitive capacity, to then drive our health and well-being. So that's where we're looking at mindset. So it's a very big piece here, because the way we see the world, the lens through which we are seeing everything, really defines the world itself, right? We all have different perceptions. We all have different way of looking things. And that can really be a huge, huge influencing factor in our health and well-being. So that attitude and approach, it's not something that you just have or you don't have. It's something that we can develop, something that we can work on, and there are tools that we can use to build on this. The other aspect is motivation. So here we're looking at the bigger picture of why are we even here? Why we do what we do? What drives us internally and externally? Knowing how to create the vision for the future, how to bring meaning and purpose to our work, to our daily lives. This is your why and contribution. And as you know that a lot of people who commit suicides, a lot of people who are depressed, it's because that part is often missing. They don't know the purpose and meaning of why I'm here. I'm not needed anymore. I might just better go. And the other point is, it's supposed to be action. I see that tiny bit has, for whatever reason, it made its way from the previous slide. So here, when we're looking at action, I know that in your experience, you'll probably know people who are, you'll say, personal development addicts, right? They'll go to every course they can find. They'll go to every personal development event. They'll follow all the gurus and all of the influencers. And yet their life doesn't get any better because of this. So this part is all about being able to apply this in practice. So applying our knowledge in practice, that's very, very important. And I've spent a lot of work and research on this, looking at why certain people are not able to apply. Like we all know what's good for us, right? But it's so much easier to, help yourself to that second slice of the chocolate cake instead of going for a run and, sit on a sofa with a glass of wine, watching, series of Netflix instead of, doing something more meaningful. So we all know what's good for us, but we often don't do that, right? So why? And this is really interaction between the way our evolutionary brain has been wired to survive. And we are really wired to save the energy. And our brain is only 2% of our body mass, but it consumes around 20% of our entire body's energy. So unless we know that there are bigger returns on our investment in energy to be spent, we are not going to be motivated to do anything, right? It's easier to take energy in and to preserve it. So this part is all about training our brain and training our cognitive neocortex to override some of those primer processes, but also instead of just working against it, there are ways how we can understand how those subconscious evolutionary needs are operating on the neurobiological level, and we actually can use that to our advantage. So we can tap into some of our body's circadian rhythms, ultradian rhythms of our brain waves, and some of those evolutionary needs. When we know what they are, we can drive our actions inside out in a way that is not forceful. It doesn't feel like we are bashing our heads against the wall every day, and it's not all about perseverance, but it just becomes natural way of being. So that's my approach to action there. Okay, then third aspect here, we're looking at social well-being. So as we know, we are social animals. We have not evolved for millions of years to survive on our own. And yet sometimes in a modern environment, we live as we are, right? We say, let's isolate and sit at home for half a year and, everything will be fine, we'll be safe. And we are really not taking in consideration what role our social networks and social support networks have in regulating our emotions, in helping us to self-regulate, in helping us to sense check where we are, in having that understanding that we are not on our own in this journey. So that social aspect is so crucial, and it's one of the primary driving needs from evolutionary perspective. And within that, there are three aspects here that we are measuring. So we're looking at your identity, we're looking at your relationships, and we're looking at the sense of belonging. So when we look at identity, I think some of you who work with young people nowadays will also realize that there are a lot of identity crisis happening, right? People don't know what gender they are, there are all these kind of racial connotations where people don't want to associate themselves with that. I don't want to be named as this or that. All the gender discriminations and abuse and so on. There's so many different aspects there that it's really, everybody wants to know for who they are, and everyone wants to define themselves as something unique. And yet we are forgetting that we are the social beings. We are supposed to be more the same, not different. And there's so many factors that shape that identity. So the way we've been brought up, the way we've been educated at school, the way the values, beliefs that's been shaped through our interactions, things like religion and things like our national culture and so on. There's so many different things there that shape that identity, and it can be either divisive as it is in the community context, but the same identity division can happen internally within the individual, where there are some of the parts of us are not congruent with one another, and there is this internal conflict that where we don't know who we are. So it's awareness of who we really are, how we fit as in that identity in a bigger context, and actually being accepting and happy with who we are, being really content with our own identity. It's very, very big part of who we are. And this also, when we talk about acceptance, it includes accepting yourself for who you are, including your body, your looks, your mindset, your ways of being and doing things. So the identity is a quite interesting and complex topic there in itself, that I could spend entirely another workshop all on its own. Then we look at relationships, so your closer relationships, so your family, your friendships, your love life, sexual relationships, wider networks and communications that you have. And here we're looking really at the quality of those relationships, the closeness, the intimacy, how deep you allow other person to know you, and how deeply you know other people. It's those bonds are really can really be life-saving. So it's the quality of those relationships, the depth of those relationships that we are looking at. The other aspect there in a wider community context is sense of belonging. So now we are not looking at the depth of it, now we're looking at the width of our entire sense of community. So are we included in a bigger group? Are we accepted by and liked and appreciated by others? Do we have some groups of affiliation that we can identify ourselves with? And it can be multiple groups based on whatever, your country, your religion, your interests, your whatever that you identify yourself with. And also knowing your role that you specifically play within that bigger group. Because here, even from that evolutionary point of view, if we feel like we don't contribute to the bigger group, if we feel like we don't add value, there is a risk of exclusion. And that is threatening to our life in a way at the subconscious level, because for millions of years, we would have not been able to survive on our own. So this sense of belonging is very, very crucial for our psychological safety that we have. So those are social well-being aspects.
Evelina, could I just mention that we've had a good question from Gabriella, if you just wanted to take a look, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Gabriella, would you like to ask the question, or? No.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, having worked quite a lot in kind of team management and team leadership, I wonder whether you'd encountered any kind of resistance from individuals in participating in this kind of survey.
If I came across against what? Sorry, just say once again.
Resistance, so people not wanting to participate in the
not
survey.
wanting to participate. Yeah. Absolutely, and I think that's where not wanting to participate is the sign of lack of safety and lack of trust. So if we want people to participate in anything, we really want to look at creating that psychological sense of safety for them, where they feel safe and they can be trusted with, you know, with whatever actions or words or their participation there. So definitely in organizations, there are a lot of resistance there in terms of participating in, let's say, even sometimes team events. But also when we are asking people to open up and share their own personal experiences, there are different reasons for resistance there, because the organizational structure does not support the individual's journey sometimes after that. So let's say someone might open up and that might be used against them in some performance reviews. They might open up and then they make themselves vulnerable for abuse or discrimination because of that. So there are a lot of this kind of culture and environment where sometimes it doesn't create for us environment where we feel like we can belong, we can contribute, and that we even want to be part of it. So we tend to distance ourselves from it if it doesn't feel safe. Does that make sense, Gabriella? Does that answer your question?
Does, yeah, perfect. Perfect sense. Thank you so much.
Right, definitely. And we'll look at some of this in more detail as well when we look at the organizational one. So how can organizations create some of those aspects?
Brilliant. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then we're looking at the finally physical well-being. So when we say physical well-being, yes, there is our kind of illness and physical health side of things, but we are looking here at much broader context, because we are looking also at the physical environment that surrounds us, right? So when we look at environment, we're looking at our home, we're looking at our right to our privacy and confidentiality. We're looking at things like having financial security and stability, also having access to nature and being able to spend some time outdoors. Those are all factors that are contributing greatly to our health and well-being. And also from environment point of view, when we're looking at, you know, overcrowding, social housing, when we're looking at air pollution, all of those factors are influencing our health and mental health especially as well, so, and well-being. So there's so many aspects there that we are not considering. When somebody comes to us with a problem, we are not measuring sometimes how do they live, where do they live, do they actually have means and space for their own individual to feel safe, to be to have that privacy and access to nature and so on. So the next, when we're looking at physical health, I think this one is quite self-explanatory and straightforward. We are looking at any illnesses, any disabilities, any pain. And again, here, there is in a lot of surveys, when I've been building this, I've screened so many different surveys as well, just to kind of see how some of the aspects are being assessed and what works, what doesn't work. And when we look at physical health, when we look at even things like disability, for example, there is straight away judgment that if I claim that I am disabled, that my life is somehow less and somehow limited and I'm in trouble and so on. So we are not necessarily looking at, you know, do you have the disability or not? But if you do have it, how well are you able to lead your life with it? Is it limiting you in some way, or is it not? Maybe you find a way to use that towards your advantages, especially when we're looking at neurodiverse, for example, neurodiverse people. that can be such a great, huge advantage and should never be looked as disability. So it's a broader context of health when we are looking at very, very kind of inclusive way. And also we are highlighting certain things that have a proven impact on our mental health, and yet it's very often being dismissed. So for example, things like gut health. Your microbiome has tremendous influence on your ability to regulate your brain processes. And that is not anywhere included yet in traditional mental health treatments. So the health of your microbiome can be one of the strongest and probably most effective interventions in managing mental health, and yet it's not being actively used. We're looking the same with your hormonal balance. If your hormones are out of order, it will have a knock-on effect on your ability to regulate your emotions, on your self-control, on your behavior, on a lot of other biological processes that manifest as different psychosomatic illnesses. So we are really want to look deeper at this aspect and really comprehend like what is influencing my well-being, how can I build it, and all these influences that are shaping it. Inflammation also in the body is proven to have very clear links with depression. Quite other many psychosomatic disorders are also due to inflammation in the body, but specifically when we look at depression and when we look at medication and antidepressants, there are nearly half of people with depression do not respond to medication. So they are so-called treatment-resistant depression. And when we look at it, we now know the latest research shows that those people who don't respond to medication is because there is higher inflammation in their body, and there are gut microbiome imbalances there as well. So by simply introducing anti-inflammatories together with antidepressant can increase the effectiveness of the medication. But of course, while I understand the purpose and role of medication, I want to again step back away from that and look at how can we maintain our bodies and our physical health so we don't even have that inflammation in the first place, and we don't develop that depression in the first place, and we can maintain our good health in the first place. So it's really looking at the processes and practices that can help us to do that. And finally, it's safety. So we can look at it from more kind of compliance and governance point of view, from health and safety processes, from physical aspects within our environment. But there is also psychosocial hazards, right? So there is safety from abuse, safety from harassment, safety from emotional harm, and so on. So we're looking at all of these other aspects there, because just because you have a safe house to live in, if you are being abused by a partner or someone at work and so on, it's not safe at the psychological level. So the psychological sense of safety is also really, really crucial in that process. So those are those 4 aspects and all of these 12 categories that contribute to that, with some insights for you what exactly we are looking at when we're digging deeper into each and every one of those. So any questions here? Any other reflections on those aspects here? And next, what I'd like to look at is now, okay, so how can we use our organizations as that supportive environment so it can build all these 12 aspects? So we have all of these categories of physical, emotional, cognitive, social well-being. And I think from what we've discussed so far, digging in deeper, you could probably have an idea of what we need to do to bring some of those aspects into our organizations. So from here, actually, I really would love to open up for a broader discussion and look into those 4 categories. So those 4 categories form part of our organizational well-being assessment. And our organizational well-being assessment is specifically designed to test your effectiveness of your training and development, the support infrastructures we have in place, the data monitoring and governance and compliance and policy that we have in place. So if I explain a little bit about each of those, then I would love to have a discussion about this and see and look at each of them in detail and say, so what can we do? What kind of training, what kind of development we need, what kind of support, what monitoring and so on we need to address in each aspect, and what is missing and what do you have? So from training and development point of view, if we look at this first, so here we're going back to that point of everyone is talking about mental health, right? And everybody says, let's open up, let's share our experiences, let's be vulnerable. But how do you really help? How do you even know how to listen? Do you know how to respond when somebody tells you that they don't want to live anymore? What do you do if your child is self-harming? What do you do if your colleague at work is telling you that they are depressed? What do you do if your partner is having a panic attack, right? So we are surrounded by people who are experiencing those things on a daily basis, and yet we still lack those practical tools to help them. So my biggest input that I'm currently giving to organizations is really equipping companies, first of all, with that knowledge, awareness, and practical tools, how to help others and how to help yourself. So this includes really awareness of what shapes mental health and digging into some of those aspects of our well-being compass maybe, but also it includes, from leadership point of view, how do we draw the right boundaries? How do we support others? How do we take on the right responsibility to support them only up to the point where our role and our skills and our abilities allow us, so we don't create a bigger damage there. So let's have a little chat there on training and development. And I think what I'll do, I'm just going to stop sharing screens here, and then we can have like 4 little discussions here when we can look at those in detail. So you're welcome to put your cameras on. You are welcome to join the discussion and share any thoughts and your takeaways. And let's look at all these 4 aspects. And also, if you think about even your own expertise and those of you who are specialists in that field, how are you contributing to shape that? What are specific skills that you have? What is missing, and so on. Zoe, I see you raised your hand. Go on, wanna ask the question and share.
Hi, it's been super so far, by the way. I just think I did the Scottish mental health first aid training, and I think absolutely that's one of the kind of foundations upon which, you know, anyone in business or an organization or company should really have access to or be trained in, because it's a lovely way to feel quite a bit more secure, at least anyway, in how you manage kind of mental health issues if they do crop up within your organization. I'm not sure what the access to that training is UK wide, but it's a very, very good kind of training module or day.
Yes, I'm really happy you've raised this for a number of reasons here. So first of all, I'm assuming you're not based in UK, right?
I am. I'm in Scotland.
Oh, you are in Scotland. Okay. All right. Now, when we're looking at mental health first aid England and the way their training is created, I think you're right in the point that it can be used as very, very good starting point to raise awareness. But I have a lot of issues with the way how MHFA England are not taking responsibility and ownership for a number of things. First, screening the delegates who are attending. So there is no any safety procedures of who are attending. So that's one very big point that we need to make sure that organizations who are sending people on those courses, they put that themselves. And how do then they safeguard individuals who are attending that course? And how do then, again, when those people go back to their organizations, what are the practices in place to protect mental health first aiders themselves? Hi, Joe. It's okay. Thank you so much. There's a message there from Joe that she's leaving early. Thank you so much. So with that, I just want to illustrate the severity of this. I would like to share one example here where I had a case scenario where within the organization, a newly trained mental health first aider came back to the business with, you know, a little kind of badge on the shoulder. I'm qualified to help, you know, come listen and cry on my shoulder. I'm here for you. And someone came to that person late Friday evening and poured their heart out, saying, I don't want to live, I don't see the purpose anymore, and just had this really, really open, hearty conversation there. And they had that conversation. At the end of it, the person said, you know what, I'm so grateful for you being here for me. I'm so grateful for you listening. I feel so much better. Can you please keep this conversation confidential? You know, you've been so much help. I don't want anyone to know at work about this. Mental health first aider agreed, said, yeah, pat on the back, I've done a great job, goes home all pumped up, feeling great. Yet they come back on Monday, that person is missing at work. And that's where they learned that that person took their own life over the weekend. And that's where I was then called in to support, because there was a huge, huge mess of blame, of accusations, of why the mental health first aider didn't report. He didn't know who to report. There was like missing processes there. There was a duty to respect the confidentiality. There was this whole blame and scenario. And now this poor mental health first aider will have to live with this for the rest of their lives. Okay. So after witnessing things like that, I know that, and even I tried to raise this several times. Several of my colleagues who are working on this, in that field, they are aware of this issue. And mental health, MHFA, they are aware of this, and they are refusing to do this, to take ownership of that. I see Sam would like to comment. Yeah, go Sam. Now, before you say anything, Sam, I just wanted to highlight that there are very specific issues based in UK. So when I'm highlighting some of those issues, it's UK-based problem. That's where I work, and that's some of the exposure that I'm highlighting. In the US, for example, their training is much more practical, and they actually have a little bit more practical tools, and they have different way of intaking people into those courses. So in Canada, they have also very different processes there. So Sam, I know you are based there, so I'd love to hear your thoughts and insights there.
Thank you, and this is a great presentation. The comment I wanted to make, and sorry, I just pulled off the side of the road because I was driving. The comment I wanted to make just in general, in terms of all kinds of training around the topics that you and I have discussed, is the intent behind it. And unfortunately, you have organizations who are sending individuals for training so that they can have that badge of we care, and that's as far as it goes. So I think when we're talking about training and training in organizations, there has to be a culture of acceptance and understanding around mental health and mental health awareness before you take that next step of whether it's you know, mental health first aid or whatever the training may be. And I think one of the challenges that I have, and I'm sure many of you do have as well, is that often the C-suite, the executives are not involved in the training. I see this when I go out and I do trauma responses. I see this when I go out and I do trainings. It's take care of everybody else, or you know, that really doesn't apply to me. when it really does. And I think if we can start to emphasize training around the executive level, so that kind of conscious awareness then can filter down into the organization, more of a top down. And you know, the assessment tool that you have is great and all of that, and some of the comments you've made are spot on. But I think until we can change that culture from the executive position, we're still going to be running into, unfortunately, situations like this.
Absolutely, you are right, Sam. And it's from the top leadership that we can see then those examples, and the culture is created two ways, right? First, there are these role models at the top who are role models, some of those values, because there are so many businesses who have all those values printed on the walls, right, with the very beautiful graffitis, and it's like, you know, look how cool we are. And yet, if those top leaders don't live those values, it really has detrimental effect on the culture. So absolutely. And I'm one thing that I'm really kind of grateful for the whole pandemic situation, that this has been really highlighted. And what I'm usually talking about is responsible leadership. So when I'm delivering my leadership training, I'm always including this in role modeling some of those values, taking care of your own mental health. And there are a lot of different aspects there where some of those leaders at the top, so for example, with executive coaching, there's been so many times when executives order coaching, but actually there's therapy that's happening behind the closed doors, because you ask them, you know, questions like, when was the last time you cried? And they're like, no, I can't cry. I'm CEO, I'm executive, I'm this and that, right? So they have these labels, those identities that kind of stop them from being just human, right? And in exactly the same way, you look at opposite, you look at somebody who is suicidal, who is depressed, who is anxious. People are not saying, I feel anxious today, or I feel depressed. It becomes, I am depressed, I am this and that. And it becomes a personal limitation. That's where that identity aspect there, that within the training, we start to kind of shift that all of that is just human emotions. And at whatever level we are, from the top to bottom, we need to be able to talk about this without identifying ourselves, you know, with specific role, label, and identity. So yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sam. Thank you for highlighting that.
Andrew and Carmen have a question, I believe.
Hi, Evelina. I guess I just wanted to say congratulations on this presentation. We don't often, we watch quite a lot of stuff, and we're just blown away with your professionalism and the language, very specific words that you use, and just the way you've presented has been fantastic. I guess my question may be a little bit, not quite where we're at, it's maybe a bit further down the road about really the practicalities of how you measure all this kind of stuff. I guess that's kind of where my masculine head's going about the structures of it. But yeah, I think just we keep going on this topic, and we'll come back to you later about that, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. It is a lot of different ways to measure different aspects. So it's not one question to answer, because when we look at all of this, you know, the way you measure you know, your environment, you can simply ask, do you have a home and do you feel safe in it? Do you have a private space, right? But when you look at how do you measure your ability to regulate stress, then we are looking at the concept of psychometrics, where the way the question is being asked will elicit specific information that the person is not even aware of, right? So very often in a lot of well-being assessments, they don't tell you anything you don't know yet. They will tell you, how is your mood today? How did you sleep? For how long you've been feeling blue? And based on that, they'll say, there's your label, right? What we want to ask is look at what is your ability to feel great, right? To be able to get yourself out into, you know, out of the blues and so on, right? So we are looking at situational scenarios, for example. We're looking how likely you are to respond like this and that in specific situations. We're looking at kind of sliders where we are looking at extremes. You know, let's say you walk into specific event and this happens, how will you respond? So the person is not necessarily even aware of what exactly is being measured. They're kind of going through their process of exploring and kind of conversational engagement there, and we pull psychometric data with that from a lot of behavioral analytics. Yeah.
We have a question from Michael. Evelina.
Go, Michael.
Hi, Evelina. Thank you. It's a question really building on something that Zoe had raised, and then Sam had kind of added to it. Really, was from the work that you've done, do you find that the level of engagement within organisations is better with external experts coming in, or actually increasing the knowledge of people within the organisation?
So very, very good question here. I think it depends, because it really depends on the safety of environment that organization has created internally. So it's the culture. So if you have a culture where it's okay to open up, it's okay to talk, then internal support groups, community discussions, kind of peer-to-peer support groups work better. I still find them that it works better when it's facilitated by an external expert, because it's at the end of the day, you lead the business and you lead your projects, you manage your team. Those are very different skills needed than where you need to manage your well-being and mental health. So having some of those kind of internal groups work very well for the companies that have good internal culture. But there are some other companies that I think, in line with what Zoe probably also mentioned before, with that kind of resistance, or was it Gabriella who mentioned before, resistance, why people are not participating it's when there is that safety, where there is that threat for person to open up, then it's actually better to do it externally and to do it in a way that's confidential, that it does not require for you to declare anything to the organization. And obviously, ideally, we want to have a balance of both. We want to have an internal support mechanism that is like first line of support, where you can just be there, part of the bigger group, and share your concerns. But when it gets to then more kind of in-depth expert support, then definitely that needs to be managed by external experts. So I always encourage organizations to set up both and know where the boundary is, and that boundary will vary on the businesses. Some businesses have a capacity and they can build their internal ways of supporting their employees much better than others. Some other companies don't even have capacity, resources, or infrastructure to do that, and then it's safer to outsource all of it externally. So yeah, it's a balance between the two. Does that answer your question, Michael, or anything you want to comment on that as well?
No, that was fine, because my question kind of came out of what Sam was saying about where you get buy-in at CEO, C-suite level, where and I do leadership training similar to you do, and one of the bits, or one of the sections of that, is about intimacy, which is about, and this I guess is the difference between creating leaders and the differentiation between leaders and managers, is about creating that intimate space for people to be able to come in and have confidential conversations in the knowledge that it's not going to go anywhere else. And I think Sam was spot on, really, in terms of you need that level of buy-in and walking the walk as well as talking the talk, to actually get that cascading down through an organization, because otherwise you're not going to get the buy-in.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Michael. And I see Sam has to leave, so thank you, Sam, as well. And Michael, I agree, because as well, you are working in that leadership environment, and you even know that even for any training, you still need to have that approval and buy-in, and the development has to happen at the top layers as well. So in organizational well-being assessment, we actually have that question: do you have mental health advocates at the board and executive level?
Brilliant.
Because if you don't, you can have the most amazing infrastructure and support, it will never reach that impact that it's required. So absolutely, that buy-in is necessary. It sometimes starts with having conversations and having those top executives being vulnerable and opening. One recent initiative that was done by RB, they actually used a charity that they asked someone to come in and facilitate like very open, very vulnerable conversations where some of these executives were asked to share some of their own personal mental health struggles, and that had really, really positive effect on kind of that safety and culture there. Yeah, so it's definitely that buy-in is absolutely crucial. But the question is, I guess for those of you who work in organizations, is how do you get it, right? How do you get that buy-in? And I think it's really, for us as professionals, that's again another reason why we developed this tool, to know that we can track this, we can demonstrate that ROI, because not every executive, not every leader is actually even interested at that level where they deeply care about those at the very bottom. And therefore, as sad as it is, but you have to demonstrate the numbers and figures and illustrate that, you know, if you do this for your employees, it will translate to X amount of profit and growth and reduce turnover for your organization. So it's a balance between human touch and building relationship with that leader, connecting with that person beyond their title on the very, very human level themselves, but also having that business hat on the side where it's needed, and to be able to put it on and say, actually, you know what, and by the way, this is how it's going to translate on your organizational scale in terms of numbers and figures.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Right. Any other questions that you have? Jacqueline.
Thank you. Such a wonderful presentation. I was curious about, I think you've covered this a little bit in all over the place in many of your answers, but when you're working at scale, when you're working with organizations, so much of what we might call a healing process is ultimately self-selecting.
Yes.
When you're working at scale, I'm curious about how that comes to bear on working at scale, when often what's needed is people recognizing, even having the recognition that they might benefit from some personal, I'm going to just use the word healing work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question, because again, here, I think for some of us who are working in that health and well-being space, you feel like you want to save the world, you want to help everyone, right? You have that human touch, and you know how, what value your support brings, and you really want to reach as many people as possible. But at the same time, when you're working with organizations, you cannot have the same level of rapport and connection with every person. And therefore, how do you then select those right individuals to come forward to ask for their help so that the healing process can start? And I think that's where I've chosen to go organizations first, not to each individual, not to the specialists who already have people who already came to them, but through the organizations. Because through normal training, and I insist that mental health awareness training, stress resilience training, has to be as a standard for all employees, like as part of your onboarding, right? Here is your health and safety procedures. Here is your psychological safety processes, right? Unless we have that awareness, sometimes it will not even come to our minds that there are specific help that we need. Also, some high performers often refuse to admit that they need help. Right. And I was one of them. I was one of them who worked 70 hours a week to the point where I collapsed at work, and I was still saying I'm fine, right? And to the point where I've developed a tumor which was purely stress and pressure driven. And then when you end up at the point, you know, the night before the operation, where you have your team of your 20 doctors coming in to explain what's going to happen to you, and then you have to sign this agreement saying, I agree with all the consequences of this operation, including my own death. Then you stop, and it allows you to reflect on where you are and where you've gone and so on. So to me personally, I'm using some of those personal experiences to then connect with people, right? Because they might not get to the point where they are at that crisis, but in order to prevent them, they need to see the whole through, you know, and what sacrifices did it take for me to get to that, where I was this like high performers suffer from burnout in a very different ways because they mentally are very strong. So when you measure their cognitive abilities, they are so driven, they're action orientated, that they don't see inward. They don't see their needs. They don't see their vulnerabilities. They refuse to accept help. All
Right.
you get from them is yes, 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 I'll do it. And they get on with that, right? So I think it's being able to tell the story in a very humane way, in a way that connects, in a way that shares some of those experiences of, you know, our own and maybe sometimes our client cases confidentially where it's relevant, so they can see and recognize some of those behaviors that will potentially lead them to burnout, to crisis, to, you know, some potential mental health issues. So it definitely starts with some of those conversations, but again, to appeal to more rational minds, that's where you have the assessment where you can just answer the questions and it will say like, oh, your score on resilience is very low. Like, oh, I didn't think about that. So now it's a trigger for them. Like, why is that? I want to know more about it. And now, because it's a very specific niche, now you can send them specific resources to increase their awareness until you reach some point where now they say, oh, now I recognize I need help. So it's a process. It's a process of connection, self-awareness, and the right data and information. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a great question, Jacqueline. Thank you.
Thanks.
So yeah, so we looked at training and support. We looked at training to a degree. We looked at support infrastructure. So the next, let's look at in more detail into that support infrastructure and data monitoring and governance and compliance. So when we look at those, what other thoughts come to your mind? And again, when we're looking at data monitoring, you know, what are the aspects there? I think in terms of support, one thing to highlight here, what did I do? Okay, it's okay. In terms of support, the most important thing is to have a clear escalation process. What is your first point of contact? Where do you go next? Where do you go next? And if it's a really crisis situation, what is the process where you can maybe skip those steps? So I think within the organizations, within that support infrastructure, we touched already a little bit internal and external support, right? And when we would need to use what. But the escalation process is very, very important, and safeguarding policies in line with that as well. So I think Zoe mentioned as well mental health first aid, and that is great as training, but that is not a support infrastructure. Yeah. So mental health first aid provides us awareness and training about different conditions and just maybe gives us a little bit more confidence to have those conversations. But what happens next? So the support is what happens next when somebody tells you that, yes, I'm struggling with this, right? So it's all about those practical tools and where do they go to get that support to help themselves. So any other thoughts or comments on that? You're welcome to share. Right, some other aspects there. Then when we're looking at data and monitoring, so obviously the whole purpose of our Wellbeing Compass is that we can translate all of this complex information into data, right? Into data that is measurable, that can be tracked over a period of time. And now it's important, well, at least it's important to me, that that data is actually owned by the person. So there is a lot of recently increase, especially when people are working from home, this lack of trust, and companies are kind of trying to be very intrusive in monitoring, you know, what time you started work, what time you finished, how long it took you to complete that task. We are still working on hourly salaries, right? Where I don't think this should, you know, ever be the case unless you're working in a very, very specific service-based roles. So when we're looking at data and what do we need to monitor, it's a combination of these individual traits, abilities, strengths, and their risks that we can identify. But I'm adamant that that data is supposed to belong to the individual, and then individual then can choose to take that data to, if they choose, to their line manager, to mental health first aider, to some mental health ambassador, to I don't know, their wife, husband, whoever they want to talk and discuss that about. But that data is private, confidential. It's for that person, and it's purely for them. For the organizations, then, what they need to see is how that tool is being used, right? So not what the results are, but are people using that tool, and is it making a difference? So there are differences that, of course, you know, we don't necessarily want to have a score of how many people in your organization, you know, have resilience score that is below 3 or something like that, right? Because it's for each individual. But in organization, it's highlighting those pockets where maybe if there are specific categories that are low, it becomes an opportunity for the business to offer some initiatives on it. So like we mentioned before, things like gut health, right? If we know that most of your employees suffer with that, then why don't we introduce additional kind of nutritional wellness app or whatever that may be that can help them to build this? If we know that people are suffering with some of their kind of financial knowledge, now there is an opportunity to do that. So it becomes relevant. It becomes something that your company needs rather than something that is just yeah, let's guess. We think that our company would benefit from this. So it's really making those choices based on what people need. And then having, you know, when we talk about kind of governance and compliance, I think we touched on this quite a bit as well, but making sure that your policies and procedures facilitate that support, facilitate that safety, facilitate the environment, and not hinder it. So there are questions there that sometimes kind of raises eyebrows in my organizational well-being survey, for example, asking like, do you have clear communications policy in place? And people look at me like, what the hell does that have to do with mental health? Well, it has everything to do with mental health, because if you have that issue, who do you communicate it to, right? And who is the first person? What is your first line and point of support? Where do you go? Is it communicated confidentially? Or is it communicated in a way that it makes you open to abuse, discrimination, and so on? You have, I think Michael highlighted that issue of having a buy-in from leaders. Also, if, let's say, your policies ask you for your direct line manager to be the first point of contact for declaring your mental health issues to, that person is also responsible for your promotion, right? So if you put yourself in your manager's shoes, and if somebody comes to you and they say, I'm really struggling with this and this, and it might be nothing to do with work, it might be their personal life, they might be going through their divorce or they're having some bereavement or something like that. But you as a manager, knowing that, will you now put more pressure on that person to promote them? Probably not. but that might be exactly what that person needs to be able to find that purpose and motivation to carry them through that personal crisis, right? So sometimes those line managers are not necessarily the right people to make those decisions. So it's very interesting when we start exploring those dynamics, where in terms of who we're supposed to be communicating to and when. And yes, it's all very well opening up and sharing and talking about mental health, but also it's about drawing boundaries. And that's where those policies, procedures come in place, because how can we protect that individual when opening up is not an option, or where it's not safe, or where the organization now will affect that person's development career or so on. So it's very interesting, and there it's quite difficult to talk about this in a way, in very generic terms, because those are very specific issues to each organization. So that's really kind of consulting level work, where we are looking at what happens, right, when somebody comes and shares, and what are the next processes there. Yeah. Any thoughts on that anyone would like to share? Great. So I guess what I'm going to do next is, what I'd like to share with you next, guys, is how you can get your hands on this and try, okay, which I'm sure is something that you've been waiting for. I'm so sorry, my little doggy is going mad. Right, so for those of you who want to try the organizational assessment, it's absolutely free. And you receive 27-page report at the end of it with personal recommendations, and it actually highlights each of those aspects and things that we need to have in place on organizational level to maintain employee health and well-being. And in that report, there's a lot of issues that are being raised that we've discussed here. So you can really kind of use that as a manual, as a summary for the ideal world, for how things should look like if we want to create that optimum environment in the businesses to make sure that every individual can be their best where it matters the most. So elitemind.co.uk org/wellbeing, and you will be able to access our organizational assessment from there. Completed. It's absolutely free, and you will be able to see the result, and report will be sent via the PDF. You'll have to click on the email, on the link within the email to download your report. So you're welcome to do that. Now, for those of you who want to complete the individual Wellbeing Compass assessment, now this is in very early stages of launch, and the prices that we have for that, there are a few aspects there. So you can either complete the assessment and receive your individual report with scores at each of those 12 categories, and tailored recommendations for what to do next with resources in those specific areas where support is needed. And that is £39 for the access to the assessment and report. Or alternatively, you can book a session with a professional. So it's either me or some of my other colleagues who are specialists in that field with working with the Wellbeing Compass. And you can have that expert consultation where it becomes more of a mental health coaching session, where we are using this tool as a starting point to discuss concerns, to answer your questions, to dig deeper, to highlight next actions, and so on. And I know that some of you are also looking to use some of this tool, maybe not for yourself, but for your clients, something that you could use for your clients in the future. And what we're launching next year, starting from January, is mental health coaching certification with a licensing to use this assessment for your clients. So if you're interested in that, then drop me a line and we can have a conversation, and I can send you more information for this. However, I want to give you a chance to complete this assessment for free and not pay anything. Would you like to have an opportunity to do that, guys?
Absolutely.
So,
It's wonderful.
great. So I'll share now how you can get your hands on that. So because we are in very early stages and there's been a lot of development happening on this, now we are in the stage of testing everything. And the stage of testing involves user research and knowing how each person completes the survey, what obstacles they face, how specific questions land on them, and does it get the right results, and so on. So one way of getting an assessment for free is to book a call where we can arrange this to be done in a testing setting, where you'll have free access to do all of that, to go through your reports, to access that, and report is yours to keep. But you will be observed throughout the process, and you will be asked to share your thoughts as you go. So, you know, when the next question comes up, for example, you would say, oh, this is what comes to my mind first, and oh, I like this and I don't like this, and this is how I respond. I'm not sure about this, I don't understand this question, and so on. So we are looking for these user insights and for the research for people who are willing to provide the feedback and share that, so that can help us to shape some of this assessment again and make those improvements, because there's one aspect of testing it behind the closed doors. When we get it to you guys, there is of course a different response, and we want to make sure that we get as many feedback from different entry points. So one way of getting it free completely is to have that test call booked with us, and just in exchange for your feedback to us, you have that assessment done for free. So here is a link to the calendar booking system where you can book an appointment. And this is just initially to register your interest, to have a chat, to understand, you know, who you are, what you do, how would you be using this. And then I would then hook you up with our researcher to facilitate the whole interview and feedback process. How does that sound for you guys? And if you would like to provide feedback in some other ways, I would also love to hear that. So I'd love for you guys at that stage, your feedback is really, really valuable. So if you're interested in future courses, if you're interested in having a license for the assessment, if you're interested in using this tool with your clients in businesses, on organizations, if you're interested in maybe being our specialist to whom we could send some clients once they highlight, let's say, specific issue that you know that you can help. As obviously as we're growing within organizations, we have a lot of associate partners who fill in the gaps within training, within development, within therapy, facilitating groups, and so on. I'd love to have a chat with you. So if you want to get involved in any way, either on personal level, organizational level, or to establish some sort of partnership with us, please feel free to just use this calendar link, and let's have a chat and explore how we can make it work. So there we are. Thank you very much, guys. I'm just going to leave the final 15 minutes just open for any other questions, any other comments. If you were also to just take a moment to reflect on what was your one biggest takeaway from this workshop, presentation, talk, however you want to call it, that will now encourage you to think differently or to maybe do something differently. What is that? So I'd love to type that in a chat. If you type that, what is one biggest takeaway? Because I know that we've covered so much in a lot of different fields. I would really, really love to hear the biggest, the most impactful piece of data information that you've learned. Andrew and Carmen, go on.
Hi, you can hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. I think, well, the biggest takeaway, I think, actually, because I'm a therapist as well, was your facts around depression and antidepressants are not working. That was one of the main things that stepped out. But I also liked, well, I love the whole encompassing aspect of it. And obviously, because, you know, I'm a talking therapist, I don't necessarily look at some of the other aspects. So being able to get a sight of all that would be incredible. But I sound really nervous. So I'd love to do the test, but also like we've got 23 practitioners within our team. So a real range of dancers and psychotherapists, nutritionalists and functional body workers. So something, it would be great to talk to you about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's
both
wonderful.
ways, right?
Really, really nice to meet you guys, and thank you for being here. And definitely, I think I find it very interesting that when we're working in this kind of mental health world, well-being, therapy, coaching, people seem to operate within their kind of small area of expertise, which on one hand is great because you can become the specialist within that. But at the same time, and it's exactly the same in research when I'm looking at academic level, people are researching, like digging deeper and deeper and deeper until, they reach that PhD that is so niche and so specialist that then it contradicts and doesn't see the bigger picture of how things fit in. So the whole purpose of building this for me was not to go deeper, but actually to go wider, because I know that there are plenty of people, like probably you guys are, who can cover those deep specialist niches. And I'm specialist in some of them, but not all of them, right? So it's definitely about building those partnerships and building those opportunities to find the right support. So Wellbeing Compass can be that access to bring those specialists together and refer, where it's needed. So definitely, I think it's the more help and the more support that we can get with this, the bigger impact we can make, because otherwise it's we can only reach within our remit of expertise. If we want to make bigger impact, we want to be bold and go broad and wide and see how we can reach more people, how we can go out there and
And I think the world just needs more integration and collaboration. The world's becoming more divisive and polarized, and it's that very reductionist kind of way of living, and that's a very old way now. We need to look at a new way of living.
And the amount of competition that is out there, and people are, I've again being involved in that kind of startup entrepreneurship world, people are so like, this is my idea, I don't want to share it, he's gonna steal it, and I'm like, no, like if I have ideas, go, I'll share with you, you go and make it happen, because that's gonna make the world a better place. So my idea is very much from pulling resources from wherever it comes, putting all the ideas in one place and bringing the community of network and collaboration. So I see there are a few hands raised there as well. I don't know, Andrew, Carmen, if you'd like to share anything else.
Nope.
And I'll quickly, actually, just one thing, because one of the nice things we've done in relation to what you've just said is when someone comes to us is almost giving them a spectrum of different people across the team. So even though they might show, symptoms of depression, we give them access to maybe, a somatic healer, a nutritionalist, a walking therapy, a whole broad. So then they get to sample and get a taster of different therapies and I guess alternative ways of working, and then they choose from there what works for them and who they resonate with, because as we know, it's a lot about the people, not just the method.
Right, it's about the relationships and the networks, and that in itself is healing. The quality and the depth of that relationship has that healing power in itself. So it's powerful, and it should never be underestimated. And therefore, I want to build those personal relationships, not just like here is an app and you complete your exercise there. It's really building having that personal connection. Absolutely. Great. So who else have their hands raised? Go on and share and have your questions.
Can I ask Evelina two sectors or areas? I'm just interested if you will in any way be kind of exploring those with your Wellbeing Compass, and that is school education and also the NHS.
Yes. So With schools and education, that would require a little bit different assessment to be built for kids. So for children, I am working on a different project as part of Zinc VC. So Zinc have a project for this year where they're focusing on children's mental health. And also other little statistic here for you that nearly 80% of mental health issues begin before the age of 18. So if we can capture that early, if we know how we can build this resilience and emotional regulation early, we'll prevent the scale and the mass of the problem that we have in the first place, right? So with that, I'm working on a little bit separate project, which will be linked, and it still, you know, supports the same kind of philosophy behind it, but it's a little bit separate project because this is specifically designed for adults, as it's asking, you know, questions about your house and money and finances and sex and so on that might not be, you know, work and so on, that are not relevant for them. So it would need a separate diagnostic developed, which is definitely something that we're looking forward to down the line, but it's different projects we will be looking at as well. With NHS, I have very mixed thoughts there. As much as I was involved with them, I'm okay to deliver some training and awareness, but it's sometimes easier to create a new system than reshape something that is ineffective, right? And my life would be too short to make a difference, to reform NHS into something that can really work. So in a way, I'm aware of what they're doing, the processes, so on. I'd be open for, you know, collaborations, entry points. I'd be open for our Wellbeing Compass being used as a referral point of system to direct to different specialists. But I've chosen very consciously to start with businesses because that's where resources are, that's where financial resources are, and that's where decisions can be made quickly. And that's where individuals can receive that support today if they said that they need help. They can receive support tomorrow if today they told us that they need help, right? With NHS, that will never happen. So, so it's kind of the matter of where do I want to put my energy and effort, and I chose to focus on businesses. Having said that, I'm open to it. I'd be more than happy to help and support. And if you have any connections, any resources and so on, I'd be more than happy to explore that. But from what I've tried so far, it's just, it's easier to build an alternative system rather than go NHS way, as it's just such archaic, huge scale system.
Yeah, it's just interesting because I think it's such a brilliant concept, and with coaching in that kind of, you know, I love the way that you offer the individual that they can do the assessment, but they can also get kind of coaching around that, the outcome of that. That's fantastic, that extra support. But to hear that you're working on something for child mental health is very inspirational. Super. Thank you.
Glad to hear. Thank you, Zoe. You're welcome to have a chat with me as well if there is anything else that you're working in the field and you have any links, ideas, contacts. I'm always happy to explore, and yeah, definitely it's children's mental health is something that's very close to my heart, and especially when you work with people who are really traumatized, who are really struggling with a lot of mental health issues, you realize that most of those problems did start very early because of their upbringing, because of their social situations, because of traumas. And then at the end of the day, we use the word trauma. It doesn't have to be big. We all have some little traumas, which becomes big just because simply we are small children, right? And yet it becomes these frozen aspects that are locked in somatically in our bodies, in our neurology. And there are ways of being able to work with that as well. So yes, I'm looking forward to that, exploring that further.
Thank you.
Any other questions, any other thoughts anyone would like to share finally? Jacqueline?
Yeah, thanks. It's really just the briefest takeaway, I think, is I feel very heartened by the integrated approach that seems to support what I'm starting to see in the culture, that is a synthetic approach to healing, to learning. And I feel like that's so important, because that synthetic approach that is, as you say, wide, that to me is a bit of the antidote to the polarization that we're seeing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's about rebuilding those connections. And I think Andrew mentioned before as well, you know, we are in this kind of divided, polarized world where there's so many boundaries, where, you know, we are looking at our differences and individuality and, like, you know, how special we are, without actually connecting at real human level of the essence behind all of these superficial masks that we asked to wear in our roles as CEOs, leaders, business owners, whatever that we might be doing, right? So it's yeah, I think it's a big mission, probably bigger than life, trying to do all of this, and working in business leadership development and startup infrastructure. This is exactly what I'm trying to bring it in, that human touch, and come back home to nature, to who we are, to what really drives us, and understand it from the science point of view, from the neuroscience, from the neurobiology point of view. So it doesn't become just you know, kind of hippie crystal healing, but it just has a substance to it, right? We have a healing at a very, very deep neurological level. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Let's keep in touch and have an amazing day. Speak soon.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.